We're looking at it this week in the sense of a couple of things. Life by the Torah benefits the future. Because we've looked at some of the things already. How he reminds his people of the things that he has done. This is the first week. He reminds his people of things he has done in order to prepare us for the things that he is about to do, to help us to trust him for the days that are ahead. And he reminds his people, this is last week, of who he is, so they can trust him again for tomorrow. Because they are on the verge, they are on the edge of this time when they're going into the promised land. And they're going to need all of these different lessons. They're going to need all of these different things that they have learned over their 40 years in order to be ready to go into the promised land and have the success that they need in order to be there. So the key this week is that, he has laid out his Torah. He has given his instructions all the way back even before the 40 years began. But he begins to explain some of the benefits of living by his Torah, his instruction, his walk, his halakha, his way of life, for their future life in the land. He wants them to get ready he wants them to start living while they're wandering in the desert for 40 years. He wants them to start living as if they are already in the land as much as possible. And that's an important thing for us to keep in mind, is that we need to, as much as we can, live as if we are living in the kingdom, and by the way of life that the kingdom represents, and by the way of life that he has for us. So we need to realize the benefits of living his way, because that's our future. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
We get that right off the bat in Deuteronomy chapter 7. The first verses that we read this Torah portion, he says, "Then it will happen as a result of your listening to these ordinances, when you keep and do them, that Adonai your God will keep with you the covenant kindness that he swore to your fathers." Okay, that's an important thing to keep in mind. It's our listening. It's our, what's the word for listening? Shema, right? If we are listening to what he has to say, to these ordinances, to these judgments, to this Mishpat is the word, and it's his judgment or his justice. If we're listening to his decisions, it's the act of deciding a case. It has a very legal concept to it. And it's coming from or out of that place or seat of judgment. We were just singing about the kingdom of God. We were singing about worthy is the Lamb. He's the one who is sitting on the throne. Guess what that is? That's the place or seat of judgment and authority where those kinds of decisions are made, where the sentences and decisions are laid down. These are God's legal pronouncements. It's like the Supreme Court. It's more than the Supreme Court. It's the supreme of the Supreme Court kind of decisions. All right, there is no higher authority. There is nobody else that you get to appeal to. There is no second opinion. There's no dissenting opinion that you get to look at. It's his mishpat. It's his ordinances. Okay? No higher authority, no appeal, no second opinion. And it says that, that we are supposed to keep and do them. To keep them. And I thought this was really interesting. I think we've looked at this one before. It's the word shamar. It's very similar. It's in that family of Shema. But to keep means really to hedge about or encircle. Okay, that's going to be important. But it has with it the idea of guarding and protecting and observing. It's that in that same family of Shema, of listening and obedience. Okay? Shema, to guard, to protect, to observe. And then the word for keep and do them, do is the word asa, to do, to make or produce, to accomplish, to advance or appoint. And it's to bring about. Whoops, how'd that get out of order? To bring about or to observe, celebrate. And this idea of doing them is the word that's used when we talk about the feasts. You do the feast. It's the asa. That's the word. And he is saying he wants us to keep and do all of his judgments, all of his ordinances, all of his commandments. He wants us to do them. And guess what? That includes these. Okay? So it's to celebrate, to observe, to keep, and to do them. So there is a result when we keep and do his judgments, his ordinances. There's a result, there's a benefit, there is a future for the people. And we are affected when the people of God, when we listen to, when we keep, when we observe his judgments, his declarations, and his legal pronouncements. We experience a benefit from that. We are affected, our future is affected from that. And so we see that again. Here we are. As a result of your listening to these, that's an important phrase. It shows up in various forms throughout this passage, this section. As a result of listening to these ordinances, when you keep and do them, then Adonai your God will keep. Shamar, he will encircle, guard, observe, and protect with you the covenant kindness that he swore to your fathers. And of course, that word covenant is a berit. That's a cutting, this compact, this alliance or confederacy. Comes from a couple of words, is where it has this root in, is bara, means to select or choose, but it also means to feed or cause to eat. That's why so many of these things, these covenants, are established around what? What event establishes a covenant?
Harvest.
What's that?
Harvest.
Well, not just a harvest. There's something that happens in the moment.
Killing of an animal.
It's a meal. Yeah, it's a covenant meal. The killing of an animal. The covenant meat is so there is a feeding or a causing to eat in order to establish this. It's also from bara, which means, again, to select and choose, to feed or to cut down. But bara also means to create, to shape, or to form. And she doesn't have to go anywhere, my goodness. My children are much louder than that.
No, this one was producing something.
Oh, okay. That's different.
A change is needed.
But, this word bara is also where we get the, in the beginning, God created. Bereshit bara Elohim. That's where we get that in. So that's the word that is used there. And so what's important about this is he is creating, he is establishing a special relationship with his people, with the people of Israel. And in so doing, he's creating a special people. Right? The nature of this relationship is this word chesed, which is kindness, which is favor, goodness, or mercy, or faithfulness and loyalty. That's the kind of covenant, that's the kind of relationship that he wants to have with his people. He wants to have a relationship, a covenant based on faithfulness, loyalty, for kindness and mercy. It's the basis of any marriage. Should have these things. And think about it like this. This kind of struck me, and this may not be new to you, and it's, these thoughts have been in there before, but it just really hit me this week. Have y'all ever heard someone pray and ask God to surround somebody with a hedge of protection?
Yes.
Y'all ever heard that before? Okay, that's not totally out of the ordinary. That's good. We do that usually when somebody is like under attack, when their health is at risk, or when they're going through a really hard time. But that's what this is supposed to be. This covenant of kindness, this covenant loyalty is supposed to be a hedge of protection around us. It's a promise that he made to the fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob. And when we enter into that relationship with him, when we enter and walk by faith, and we listen to his commands, when we listen to his ordinances and those things, we are coming inside, we are coming under that hedge of protection, and it's by means of keeping and guarding his commandments. So when we talk about hedge of protection, what we really mean is you should be keeping the commandments of God. Because if you are keeping the commandments of God, you are in that hedge. You are surrounded by his protection. You're coming under the shadow of his wings. So is it any wonder that most of us as believers You see so much of the body of Messiah this day. We are weak and unprotected. In a lot of ways, we are always under attack and are seeing little victory and it's because we are not truly under his hedge of protection. And why not? Because we're not really listening or keeping or doing his commandments, the terms of that covenant. What better way can Satan weaken his targets than to convince them that, you know what, you don't need that. You don't need to come under his protection. You don't really need to come under their greatest source of protection from his attacks. Y'all ever, it doesn't make sense for us to do that, does it? Now, imagine it like this. Maybe you've seen somebody or some people like this. Maybe you've actually been this person. But have you ever seen that person that they are in a driving rainstorm and they're carrying an umbrella, but it's sitting right at their side. They're just kind of holding it in their hand. Y'all ever been that person? Where you've got the umbrella, it's raining all over you, but you don't put it up. I've been that person. Maybe I'm afraid of the lightning or something else that might strike it, right? But there's little point in carrying an umbrella if you're convinced that you should never open it. What if you believe that if you open this, automatically you'll die? There's no reason to carry it if you're never going to open it. If you live in a castle, that's under attack. If you're convinced that we can't live behind the walls, we should live outside the walls, are the walls really doing any good for you? Not really. And what good is having a shield of faith that is to extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one if you believe that you don't need it? If you don't want to wield it, if you never lift the shield up over your head and come under its protection, because that's how you defended yourself against the arrows, you put it up. And it was the ones that were coming down from above. You don't lift it over your head, but what good is a shield of faith if it's just an ornament on your wall? Right? If you believe you don't really need it. See, in the same way, the enemy has convinced the majority of the believing community that they don't need to live by or keep the terms of the covenant, that it's not for them. And in so doing, the enemy has convinced God's people to live out from under his hedge of protection. Can we see that? Yeah, we can see that. That's why, in a lot of ways, we're such easy pickings. Why we see so much defeat and failure. And that's what the Father is inviting us to do. He is inviting us to come in under his hedge of protection. Because that's a blessing. That is a benefit of living his way. We are protected by him. But there's even more. There's even more of these blessings with these commandments when we keep and do them. So, as a result of listening to these ordinances, when you keep and do them, then Adonai your God will keep with you the covenant kindness that he swore to your fathers. Then it says in verse 13, he will love you, bless you, and multiply you. He will also bless the fruit of your womb and the produce of your soil, your grain and your new wine and your oil, the increase of your herds and the young of your flock in the land that he swore to your fathers to give you. So the creator of the universe is going to love you, bless you, multiply you and all the people. He's going to bless and multiply the soil, the grain, wine, oil, even the herds and the flocks. That word love is the word ahav, to love, to have affection for. It means like to breathe after. It's a sense of longing or desire or delight. That's the kind of love that he is having for his people. To bless, obviously, is the word to barak. We say that all the time, but the blessing means to kneel, as in toward or to bless God. When it's from us toward him, we kneel, but to bless as a benefit from God, and it's toward humanity, and it's essentially to cause to prosper. And then multiply is the word rabah, which means to increase, to be or become great, many, or numerous, to bring out an abundance, or to enlarge, or to excel, to make excellent at something. And then he says this in verse 14, from all peoples you will be blessed. So again, he's making this special people through that covenant. There will not be male or female barren among you, or your livestock. Now this is an interesting statement, considering when you look over the accounts of the scriptures over and over again, how women who are barren are so often significant to the story. Y'all notice that? It's women who are barren that are important to the story, like Sarah, like Rachel, like later Samuel's mother Hannah, or even Zechariah's wife Elizabeth. But it's what happens, it's the ending of their barrenness that all of a sudden everything changes. It's a massively significant moment when that barrenness that they never thought was going to end suddenly ends. For so long it would be a burden, and many women and families, even today, are still struggling through it. But you think about for an agricultural, a farming type of community, having children, having your flocks, having offspring, that's vital. A people cannot survive without it. And that's one of the things that we're actually seeing in our day. We're seeing the danger of what happens to a culture that has a low birth rate, as most Western cultures do. And when you look at the numbers, you need a birth rate, a fertility rate of at least what's called 2.1. You have the average has to be every woman having 2.1 children. I always wondered where that 0.1 child came from, but you have to have at least more than the 2 on average to keep your population where it's at or even barely growing. And anything under that, and it starts to decline. Back in 1950, worldwide, women were having 4.7 children on average. In 2017, it's 2.4. That's worldwide. So we're barely over that rate. And it's projected to be, by the end of the century, they're projecting that rate will be 1.7. You look at different countries and nations today. In Sweden, the average went down as low as 1.7. They've had some turnaround and gone up to 1.9. In Singapore, the rate is 1.3. In the United States, in 2019, we have a rate of 1.9. Canada is 1.56, they say. So what's the future of our population in general?
But that's not the whole population. You have Mexican Americans, and you have
Immigrants.
Right.
You also have within
as an average.
Yeah, if you think of white people, that's very low, and that. But the other cultures coming in.
Right, and that's one of the emphasis behind many of the nations in Europe and in America. That's one of the emphasis on immigration and bringing in other populations, because they're trying to prop up their own population.
Although Muslims very high in this country.
Yes.
But they talk about depopulating.
Right, they do. And there's an intent behind a lot of that. But what we have, the problem is that in our sophistication, in our enlightenment, we actually begin to lose sight of what God sees as a blessing. We lose sight of what He sees as important. See, such a culture is going to grow, a culture that's rejecting this kind of blessing from Him, the blessing of family, the blessing of children, those types of things. Such a culture is going to become increasingly frustrated, and they're increasingly putting their future at risk. The culture that becomes unbalanced, as it is in China and India, is risky thing for everybody around them. They have an unnatural ratio of male to female because of the lack of children, because of the emphasis of wanting to have a male child. Back in 2018, there was an article in the Washington Post stated that in China, they have 34 million more men than women. And in India, it's 37 million more men.
Thanks to communism.
That's, okay, you figure this out. Well, India's not communist, but
No, but I mean, there it is.
But here's the thing. That's like the entire state of California. Okay? California right now has 39 million people total. All right, so imagine being in a country, in a nation, where the entire state of California has no future for a family. That's bad. All right, that's part of the whole growth of the sex trafficking trade. Guess what? That's part of it. That's a recipe for disaster, and it's actually a recipe for war. Because a huge number of men have nothing to live for, but they have a lot of reasons to be angry and frustrated with little hope, and so they'll go and fight for anything that they're told to fight for. All right? Western cultures will eventually be replaced by people and cultures that do value and see children as important. In just a few generations, they'll outnumber the traditional European, like you were talking about. All the ones that were coming in over the last few years, they're having children like crazy. And that's nothing wrong with that. But they're people that don't necessarily have the love for their culture, for their values, for their faith. All of those things are going to be replaced. Okay? God sees this as a blessing. God claims that his hedge of protection and his covenant will lead to abundance, blessing, right? Things like family. But we'll also see his blessing in the sense of the way that we'll lack some things that no one really wants anyway. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to show you this. This is 2017 current populations and a projected population at the end of the century. China's population is expected to decrease by the end of the century by a lot. India, the same. Nigeria, some of the sub-Saharan African nations are growing still pretty well. USA, we're kind of holding steady. They show a little bit of an increase in there, but I don't know exactly how they're wanting to pull that off.
Well, they're not showing that those different groups within
Yes.
the United States,
Yes.
and that's the big thing.
And Japan is also one that's seeing a pretty significant decrease. But some of these things, as far as things you don't want, his blessing will be a part of. From all peoples you will be blessed. You will not be a male or female barren among you or your livestock. Adonai will remove all sickness from you, and he will not inflict on you any of the terrible diseases of Egypt that you knew, but will inflict them on all who hate you. So, especially when we're talking about in the land or in the life of the kingdom, sicknesses are also not supposed to be defining our existence as God's people. And he will direct sickness towards those who hate and persecute you. Let me ask you all a question. Right now, when you look at our nation, are sicknesses and diseases increasing or decreasing?
Increase.
Would you generally say?
Oh,
Are we becoming healthier or more unhealthy?
very unhealthy.
We're typically becoming more unhealthy. All right, healthcare expenses are increasing. We're getting typically sicker, not healthier, despite all of our improvements, despite all of our new technologies, new medical science, all that kind of stuff. Our health overall is decreasing. Do you think we might be getting a message of some kind? Do you think we might be coming out from under his hedge of protection? We may not be totally out from under it, but we're missing some of the benefits of it. Are we growing? Are we becoming an enemy of his people increasingly?
There's the reason right there.
Yeah. We should keep and do his commands as individuals. We should seek to have them represented in our culture. We should fight against the hatred to the Jewish people and Israel that is growing in America, because that is increasing. And the last few months you've been seeing a lot more of it, haven't we? A lot more of it. All right? So though we are experiencing some of the things we should be avoiding, because we as a culture, as a people, are not really keeping his commands the way he asks us to. But again, there's more. There are more benefits to keeping his commands. Chapter 8, verse 1. He says, you are to take care to do the whole mitzvah that I'm commanding you today, so that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land that Adonai swore to your fathers. You are to remember all the way that Adonai your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness in order to humble you, to test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his mitzvot or not. So again, he repeats that idea of living in the land. Living in the land, multiplying in the land, possessing the land, right? But leading up to the days of actually living in the land, God still wanted to know what was in their heart. That's the important thing. Their time in the wilderness was a time of testing. Again, that's that connecting of the 40 days, 40 years, the number 40 to times of testing. Okay? He wants to know this. In all of their experiences, before they are going into the land, before they are ready to go into the land, he needs to know where they're at. And that says something to us as well, as the people of God, as we are looking forward to the return of Messiah. He wants to know this in us. Before, we are really stepping into the land, into his kingdom, he wants to know where our heart is. All right, because our Creator is most interested in finding out about our faith and our walk with him. And so in order to find that out, what is he willing to do? He is willing to do these things. He's willing to humble us. He's willing to test us, to know what is in our heart. He is, happiness is not necessarily his goal. Though, we are often happy. Wealth, power, prestige, attention, that's not necessarily, or that's not particularly his goal for his people. Though some might have those things at times. Can he still bless us without those things? Yes, he can. Can we be happy when we are humble? Yes. Can we be happy? Can we have peace, contentment in life without wealth, power, and prestige? Yes, we can. We don't need wealth, power, and prestige to be happy. Paul talks about this in Philippians. He says, I'm not saying this because I'm in need. For whatever circumstance I am in, I have learned to be content. I know what it is to live with humble means, and I know what it is to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of contentment, both to be filled and to go hungry, to have abundance and to suffer need. I can do all things through Messiah who strengthens me. We love this part. Verse 13, that we can do all things. We don't really like this part. Right? We think that we can do all things means I'm in prosperity. I'm filled. That's what we think we mean. But you can live that way whether you have it all or you don't. And you can live that way whether you have it all or you don't, because it's what's in your heart, whether you will love and obey or keep his commandments. Because this too is a blessing from God. Even the times of testing are a blessing from God. He wants to know is whether we will continue to keep his commands, continue to walk in his way, to walk in his halakha regardless of our circumstances. For better, for worse, for richer, for poorer. What's the last one? Sickness and in health, right? That's the language of a wedding. And what was the whole debate about the book of Job? Right? The whole debate between God and the accuser at the beginning of the book of Job is, well, Job, yeah, he likes you. Yeah, he loves you. Yeah, he follows your ways. But he only does that because he's well off. He's got a big family. He's got a fortune. He's got all that. You take all that stuff out, and man, he's going to do what? Curse you to your face, right? And God was like, well, let's see. He's willing to test you. He's willing to humble you, to find out whether or not you're really going to keep his commands or his ways, regardless of your circumstances. He afflicted you and he let you hunger. Verse 3. Then he fed you manna, which neither you nor your fathers had known, in order to make you understand that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of Adonai. He wants us to understand this. He wants us to understand that having everything, having a full stomach even, is not the most important thing. The Father is going to allow things in our lives, but they will always have this redemptive or redeeming purpose. He'll even allow you to go without for a season, hunger for a season, if it's going to draw you closer to him, to help you realize that having even your physical needs met, or the basics of food and water, that's not enough. Having your basic needs met is not enough. You need more in this life. You need more than just food and water and shelter. Would y'all agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Because the kicker is, even if you have all of that, even if you have all of your needs and all of your wants met with a great abundance, guess what? That's still not enough. Even great wealth and power does not satisfy. Just watch, Access Hollywood or some TMZ or some of these other programs or websites that are out there. Look at all the Hollywood celebrities, all these wealthy socialites and politicians who turn to drugs or to alcohol, who leave their families, who throw it all away and are miserable in their abundance. They are miserable. Y'all seen people like that? I'm not the only one. They are miserable in their abundance because they're trying to live by bread alone. Yeshua put it like this. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? He's gaining the whole world is living by bread alone. You're giving up this part. Or what could a man give in exchange for his soul? Many people do gain a lot. They do gain much in this world, but their eternity is lost. And without that spiritual awakening, without that foundation of faith, all that wealth is worthless in terms of eternity. All that wealth and power cannot buy someone's way into the kingdom of God. And so many times, all that wealth and power actually pushes people further away from him. And so, if that's the case, he might remove some of it. Deuteronomy 8 makes that point. Verse 10, he says, "So you will eat and be full, and you will bless Adonai your God for the good land that he has given you." That's great. But take care, verse 11, that you do not forget Adonai your God by not keeping his mitzvot, ordinances, and statutes that I'm commanding you today. Otherwise, when you have eaten and are full and have built good houses and lived in them, and when your herds and flocks multiply, and silver and gold multiplies for you, and all that is yours multiplies, then your heart will be haughty, and you will forget Adonai your God. You may have it all. You may increase in all of that. But if you forget the Lord, it's better that you never had it at all. And we are so quick to become haughty. We are so quick to forget God. We need to be reminded of the source of all that we have. You know, Yeshua quoted this verse about the bread alone in Matthew chapter 4 when resisting temptation from Satan. He says, then Yeshua was led by the Spirit, by the Ruach, into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil after he had fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. He was hungry, and when the tempter came to him, he said, if you are Ben Elohim, if you are the Son of God, and it's a statement, it's a declaration, not really a question. It's more like a, since you are the Son of God, and we both know that you are, tell these stones to become bread. So did Yeshua have the power and the authority to do that? Yes, he sure did. But he replied, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Notice where Yeshua is. He's in the wilderness, just like the Israelites. How long has he been there? 40 days, almost like the Israelites. Right? It's a time of testing, a time of humbling, to find out what? Is he going to keep the commands? Right? He is afflicted with hunger and thirst. Has Yeshua learned the lesson from Deuteronomy chapter 8? Yes. He depends on the Word of God. He's quoting Deuteronomy against every temptation. And does he have food and manna that is provided for him? Yes, he does. He mentions that in John chapter 4. This is the conversation with the woman at the well in Samaria. Meanwhile, the disciples are pressing him, Rabbi, eat something. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you know nothing about. And so the disciples are saying to each other, well, no one brought him anything to eat, did they? Did somebody go out and do for a fast food run and come while we weren't looking? And Yeshua tells them, my food is to do the will of the one who sent me and to accomplish his work. And that's an interesting way of phrasing that. My food, my daily bread, my nourishment from the Lord is to do the will of the one who sent me and to accomplish his work. Doing his will is what he requires of us so that we may be pleasing to him. Deuteronomy 10, chapter 12 puts it this way. So now, O Israel, what does Adonai your God require of you? But to fear Adonai your God, to walk in all his ways. He requires us to walk in all his ways and to love him and to serve Adonai your God with all your heart and with all your soul, to keep the mitzvot, the commands of Adonai and his statutes that I'm commanding you today for your own good. Right? To walk is the word that we looked at before, halakha, to go or proceed, but it's also to live. It's a manner of life. The ways is the word derech, a road or distance journey, but it's a course of life or a mode of action. It's a moral character that guides and directs everything that you do. And then he talks about, but to serve the Lord your God. Serve is the word abad, which is, again, talking about work. My food is to do what? To do the will of God and to finish the work. To work for another. Okay? Yeshua has a way that he is going to walk. And he is going to uphold it. He is going to fulfill it. He is going to correctly teach it. He is going to correctly preach it, to accomplish it all along the way. Even though, and even with the fact that it ends in his death. And who benefits from that? We do. That's that hedge of protection. That's that covenant faithfulness. He will honor and keep the terms of the covenant. even when we cannot. Yeshua is listening to the Father's voice. He is keeping his Father's commands. He is walking in his Father's ways. All of him doing that benefits us. His death, burial, and resurrection makes a way for us to live in his kingdom, live in a return to the way that was back in the garden even. Which, by the way, did the garden after Adam and Eve kicked out, didn't God put up a hedge of protection around that? What, right? The fiery, the angel that had that protection to prevent re-entry. That's the picture. But it is here. It's in the land. That's where he's trying to make sure that they're ready to go into, to prepare for that kingdom, for that arrival, when all of God's people are gathered together in the land, which again, that's a picture of his kingdom. That's where the benefits are fully made manifest. Do I have this one in here? Yeah, chapter 11, verse 8, some of the benefits of walking in his ways and keeping his commands. It says, so you may be strong. Verse 9, so that you may prolong your days. Verse 14, one of the benefits is that he'll give rain for your land in its season, so that you may gather in your grain, new wine, and olive oil. These are more benefits of what they should experience when they live. That's what the kingdom is really going to be like. Then he says in verse 18, therefore you are to set these words of mine in your heart and in your soul. Does this sound familiar to anything we read earlier? You are to bind them as a sign on your hand and as frontlets between your eyes. You are to teach them to your children, speaking of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. His commands are supposed to govern every part of your life, every aspect of your life, including the blessing that he gives us. He says, you are to write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So that, again, that's an important phrase, at least the way this one translates it. So that your days and the days of your children, that's your future, may be multiplied on the land. Adonai swore to give to your fathers as long as the heavens are above the earth. As long as they are above the earth. And how long are they going to be there? They're going to be there for a while, aren't they? Is there going to come a day when we're not going to need the stars, the sun, the moon, and those kind of things? Yeah. But are we always going to have the heavens are above the earth? That's God's heart. That's what he wants for his people. And when you think about it, this is the hard part for us. If the Torah and his commands are only intended for the Jewish people, then who are the ones that would benefit, or would enjoy the benefit of that future? It would really only be them. Right? They would be the only ones who would enjoy this future with him. That our days would be multiplied in his kingdom. That's why his commands, his Torah, is really for everybody. For Jew and Gentile alike, because he wants us all to enjoy this life and this eternity with him. He wants us all to know and experience that benefit of relationship with him. And it's stepping away from his commands. That makes us vulnerable by stepping out from under his hedge of protection that he is providing for us in Messiah. We need to know that that's for us as well, that hedge of protection. We have been made citizens of the Commonwealth of Israel. We are no longer strangers and foreigners to the covenant, right? That's what we're going to read about in a little bit in Ephesians. That's why we always need that reminder for these things. We don't want to be somebody who believes that we can step outside from under what he intends for our blessing and what he intends for our protection. you kind of see this. Our need for this. This is a hymn, "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing." There's a line in here that's just a reminder for us. It says, "Oh, to grace how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let that goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to Thee." This is where we can be so often. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. That's coming out from under His protection. Coming out from under that by stepping away from His way of life. "Here is my heart, Lord. Here is my heart, O take and seal it. Seal it for Thy courts above." Again, what was the whole thing about the Mishpat? About the commands or the ordinances? Weren't they the legal decisions made from the throne? "Here's my heart, O take and seal it for Thy courts above." That's our future. That's what He has for us. That's what He is seeking in our lives. He wants to explain the benefits of living by His Torah, His instruction, His halakha, because that's our future in His kingdom.